Hello there. My name is Void Ghost, and today I'd like to ask you a question. Are you living in a simulation? Well, a lot of people are asking that question, or a lot of scientists. Some say it's probable, some that it's not. Today I'm going to go in to this and try to explain all the possibilities, especially those not touched by other people ever. And well, I hope it's interesting, and let's start by thinking about just where do we live, theoretically at least. Our universe has 100 billion galaxies, and each of those galaxies has an average 100 billion stars. Now, why is this important? Well, first of all, this means that there can be a lot of life in the universe, and that life might evolve to have enormous supercomputers. Actually, it's quite possible there's a humanity that evolved to that level, and now we're a simulation of its past. Uh, but let's just not get ahead of ourselves. So, if that's the case, the computing power, the possible computing power, is limited pretty much by the energy that you can harvest from the universe. And probably the best way for a computer to get that energy is to build it around a star. So that's called the Matryoshka computer. Basically, you got these Russian dolls that so you open one and there's another one inside, and then you open that one and there's another one inside. So that's where the name and comes from. And when you harvest the energy of a star, well, that's something that can allow you to do incredible stuff. And we're going to say what exactly that stuff is. But first, let's think about our technology, our level of technology, and is it not enough to do something like that? Well, if we're talking about the total energy of a star, and now we're talking about our desktop computers, there's no comparison, right? But for years now, we've been making simulations with NPCs inside. Those are games mostly. So maybe you heard about Minecraft, um, 7 Days to Die, Skyrim from the Elder Scrolls series. All of those games have a world, NPCs inside, so non-player characters, right? They are simulated inside the game in this case, and the computing power to run them isn't that high. Actually, it's pretty low compared to what we already mentioned. But they're no way perfect, right? I mean, you got those NPCs in there, sure, but they just kind of behave like they do something. They don't think for themselves, etc. Right? They don't do many things that we do every day. They don't interact with each other, so they are very limited. But here we got something that escapes most people that talk about this. There are very different ways you can be a participant in such a simulation. Now, what do I mean about that? Well, first of all, let me just quote a few things that are theoretically requirements to have not only a simulation that we could be part of, but many simulations and possibly simulations in simulations. At least this is what I heard about. And maybe someone would add an argument here or not. Let me just read it to you, and then I'll just discuss it, because these seem to be the top things that people think are required, and I will show you that they are actually not. First of all, it's possible to simulate consciousness. Okay, where if we're simulated and we have a consciousness, then yeah, it would have to be possible to do that, or would it? Let's just get into that in a moment. Now, the technology progress will go on. You see, we don't know how much technology is ahead of us. It's possible that in 100 years we'll kind of find out everything there is to, all knowledge will be ours. All technology that can be developed by our species will be developed, and we'll just not have anywhere to go. Perhaps expand, go to other planets, but not go in depth into technology. But that's probably not the way it's going to happen. Even when we take it in account the incredible speed that we're developing technology right now, it's probably going to take us thousands of years to get to some end of what's possible. Now, advanced civilizations don't destroy themselves. Okay, that's again something you can argue about. But okay, if they destroy themselves and that's mandatory, then unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depends how you look at it, you can't have a civilization destroying itself then developing anything, right? It's over for that. So if there's a filter of sorts that civilizations get to, for example, developing atomic weapons, and then on average, almost all of them destroy themselves. So they fire those weapons at each other and, well, kill themselves off. Or maybe they get to this technology that looks terrific and is a source of, for example, energy, free energy for everybody. But then that technology actually turns out to be very dangerous and destroys them. This could be something that stops a lot of civilizations from going above a point. But I'll just come back to this in a moment. Then the next one is advanced civilizations want to run simulations, and this one's completely off. I'll just tell you why. And well, the fifth point is kind of like, if all those 4 points are checked, then this fifth one would say that the chances are we're in a simulation, because it's like 1 to millions or billions. I'll tell you about that reasoning in a moment too. So let's go point by point. So, is it possible to simulate consciousness? And this actually kind of works with the fourth point. So advanced civilizations want to run simulations. Now, what can you be in such a simulation, and how such a simulation can look or work? What most scientists think about when they think about a simulated world is something where you got, it's full of NPCs, right? So all of us would be AIs, basically, artificial intelligence floating in this world and doing stuff, experiencing stuff, interacting with stuff. And someone would be observing this, taking notes and saying, that 20th century, when we added that technology, well, that's a blast. It went completely different than it originally went, right? Or those simulated beings. I mean, if we only had two arms and only two legs and we breathe oxygen, whoa, that would be something, right? That taught us a lot observing them, right? Such a simulation is the most complex thing to get because everyone and everything is simulated. Now, before you think, okay, so you have to simulate the whole universe at once. Oh, no. You can simplify a lot of things. For example, distant stars, distant galaxies, actually everything you don't get to, or you're not there right now. So even if there's a mountain, right, and after that mountain, there's a valley, and no one's in the valley now. It doesn't have to be simulated. It doesn't have to be shown to anyone, right? So it's kind of like in a computer game. You kind of save your computing power wherever you can. So you show only the things that someone sees. Only those have to be projected. But one extremely important thing would be, how would someone see this? How would they perceive it? Now, one sort of technology, we're kind of getting there. For example, maybe you've seen people having prosthetic limbs, and there are different ways to operate those limbs. They had these connectors to nerves that were left in the body. But lately, I think it's kind of, well, the technology is evolving. But what you can expect, or to a degree it has already been done, is that you use your mind to operate something, to do something. And that means you could technically put someone into a coma kind of situation, put something on their head, read their mind, and have that transferred to a computer generated world. Now, right now, we have VR, virtual reality. How it works is that you put your goggles on, and you hear what's in the game or in the world that's in front of you, and you see what's there. But unfortunately, there are limitations. For example, if you're moving your hand and there's a wall, well, it's not going to stop your hand. Your avatar in the game or in the generated world will indeed get there and perhaps not be able to pass through. But mostly, it kind of will. It kind of will go through that wall, for example. But if we plug someone's brain into that, that might be the difference between the clunky virtual reality we have today and the virtual reality of the future. The virtual reality which will be perfect because the connection to the brain will limit what you're going to do and what you're going to experience to what's possible or your brain thinks is possible. Now, if you have a simulation like the whole world and you put an AI into everybody, or you have a simulated person wherever a person should be, this is a lot. This is a lot of computing power. And when I heard the Matryoshka computer mentioned as something that could do this, the exact example went like this. If we want to simulate everybody that ever lived on Earth, and then we take into account just how many operations a human brain does every second, and we multiply that by the whole time humanity was present or something like that, then that gives us this enormous amount of computing power we need, and it would be hard to get, at least now, for us. But that is, of course, mm, well, not accurate at all, because first of all, the only people simulated at any given point would be those people present on the planet. So we have 8 billion people. That's how many would be we would have to simulate accurately to have an accurate simulation of this time period, for example. But that is the most complicated, most computing power greedy thing that you can develop. What is a simpler one? Well, imagine a game, and imagine the connection brain to computer I already mentioned. And you dive into the game. Now, the game prevents you from understanding that you're actually playing a game. It kind of generates a feedback on your brain, and your mind thinks that that world is the true world. That's the only one. You can have implanted memories, you name it. Um, of course, this would be much easier if you're an AI. So, for example, someone who decides somewhere in our future that, yeah, biological bodies aren't that good because they can die, and decides to go and upload themselves into a machine and basically become an artificial intelligence uh, that's based on a human. Then uh, to this computer program, it's not a problem to block some memories, to implant new ones. You want to change it? Okay. Temporarily, of course, probably. So in that scenario, you would have either one human in the whole world, and that means that if it's you, for example, looking at the screen, then wherever you are, everything around you that you hear, that you see, that you smell, that you can touch, all that is generated indeed. And actually, those things that you can touch and you're not touching, they don't have to be um, processed that well, right? So they're like images. When you reach out and touch it, then they actually have to be um, processed as physical objects, right? So only for those moments. Now, if that's the case, then all the rest of the world, well, it does stuff, right? So you got people interacting with each other, killing each other, helping each other, doing all kinds of stuff, and that there has to be some program in the background that's going to be calculating that, but it can be extremely simplified, really. A lot of those interactions, falling in love, having children, whatever it is, that's typical, basically. Um, you can have that uh, procedurally generated. So that means that you have a program that generates these kind of um, events for the people, quote unquote, because of course they're just like NPCs basically, that roam the world. And then when you decide to say watch the news, or check out what new movies are out, you're gonna see some of that always, right? And the computing power here is tiny. I mean, with the proper technology that is connecting the brain to the computer and limiting what you remember from your life, uh, I think we could technically pull that off right now. Um, Actually, I'm pretty positive that we could, and probably not just for one human somewhere, but for many humans in many places. Now, what are the other possibilities? Well, did you ever play an online game? A lot of people log in and do stuff together, right? I mean, they know they're playing a game, sure, but kind of they try to immerse themselves in whatever the game is about. If you have, say, World of Warcraft, uh, when you have a fantasy land and fantasy creatures which you play with as your avatars, that's going to be immersive in a certain way, but you're going to see that all the NPCs in that world, they just stand there. Or sometimes they move around, like do something, but it's pretty much, their interaction with the world is almost non-existent. Um, Only if you attack them or someone does, then they kind of react or they give you some response, usually in text, when you click on them. So what they are is extremely limited, and therefore it can be easily generated. What, but the active element, those are the people playing the game. Now, if you have a lot of people, then basically maybe not in 100%, but it multiplies the processing power that you need to generate this world. Uh, what's not going to be multiplied? Anything in the background. So countries fighting, you know, business deals happening, people having interactions with each other. All that won't change if you have one user or 10 or a million. But everything around you has to be generated. So if there are two people and both of them are players, let's put it like that, they are in the same area. So that narrows down the amount of stuff that needs to be generated. And you can see that in one of the games, actually many games, survival games, for example, and even more specifically, Minecraft. Did you ever see Minecraft or play Minecraft? You can see some good videos about it online. And in Minecraft, the whole area is generated in chunks. So these are these big squares. And when you leave this square, which is composed of smaller squares, um, and you go to another one, then the one you didn't actually get to is generated. Once it's generated, it's always there. So you can always get to it or go back to it, and what's there is gonna pop up as you left it in a way. Of course, if you have, say, things that move around there, there might be in different positions. So even if you're gonna be quite a bit away from them, they're gonna still do stuff. But uh, once you've seen that, that's gonna stay there. That's gonna be generated. And one of the ways that some players crashed servers in the early days of Minecraft was that you had this game, right, put up, and someone would log in and they would just go straight on and on and on and on and on. And you have to understand that the world in Minecraft is flat, but it's huge when you actually compare it to how big the our planet is. Someone stated somewhere that it's actually 7 times bigger than the area we have on our planet. That's including oceans. I'm not sure if that was accurate or not, but it's millions of meters at least in any direction from the center. I think it was 32 million, something like that. So maybe that's not an accurate statement, the exact proportion that is, but it's huge. And this is something that your computer can generate the whole world, in theory, in a few minutes. Of course, it doesn't generate everything. It generates only those chunks that you're going to see. When you move through it, it generates more. But more users at one moment going through that and putting that in the computer, the game's save file, you could put it like that, mean that there's going to be more and more processing power needed, and eventually, and you can overload the game in a way. And if you have more and more users, then the game has to basically highlight every position they're in. So every chunk and every chunk around that has to be generated. So if we have a world and you happen to be the only true person in it, then it's not a problem to generate that. And you might not be knowing that you're in such a simulation right now. But if there are, for example, 1,000 people, then it's not going to be exactly 1,000 times more, but something around that when it comes to computing power necessary to generate everything that's around us. So let me mention briefly things that you can see normally. Bacteria, for example, atoms, right? The inside of the chair you're sitting on. Until you slash it open or you take a microscope and see those bacteria, they don't have to be generated at all. Okay, so this could be something that pops up only when needed, and only then does the computer have to it has to generate it then. Now, what are other options that we can have? So we have one person, many people, everybody is generated. We could have a situation when everybody would actually be a real person. Now, this, you see, contradicts one of the points I mentioned earlier, because in that case, you wouldn't have to simulate a consciousness because everybody would be real. They would just be in a simulated world, right? Now, why would you want to spend your time in a simulated world? Well, if you play a game, you quite often discover that it's very nice, very immersive, and you spend hours and hours in that game. So that might be the reason, for example. But options that we can have in the future include being immortal one way or another. For example, being biologically immortal, so your body won't normally die unless someone specifically kills you. But even then, perhaps you have some sort of upload of your brain, and then it's downloaded into another body. Uh, of course, you can just theoretically go full AI. So you take a human being and you kind of make a digital version of him, and that's the new human. You could go into that if that's the real person or maybe just a good copy. Is it the same? But that's just one of the possibilities. And another one is that in a simulation, the time flow could theoretically, if your brain is plugged into that computer, could be altered. So you can spend an hour there, and it's going to be like a month, for example, or maybe it's going to be even more. That type of technology hasn't really been developed in our world, to my knowledge at least. So, is it possible? Perhaps. Of course, it's very possible if you upload yourself into a computer. So, if you're in an AI, then all that is just like that. Snap, it's there. You wanna experience something on, well, for you it's gonna be normal speed, but the rest of the world, it's gonna think, oh, you were away for 5 minutes, and it's gonna be a lifetime for you. Um, who knows, right? So all those are possibilities. But of those, of course, the least computing power you need is the one that where you're the single person, living person in there. And that's something that's quite often not looked at by scientists. They think a simulation is there because someone or something would like to see how these simulated events um, just play out, right? To do something without influencing them. When I think the most probable thing, at least when you look at humanity and our future, would be some sort of game, something for pleasure, something for maybe, I don't know, exploration. Maybe you want to, for example, see how medieval people lived, or put yourself in a siege of a city, right? And you want to experience that, something possibly very horrific, but it's just kind of like watching a horror movie. You go, watch it, get scared, and you move on. You have some vivid experience. So, as you see, those points that some scientists refer to as mandatory aren't that mandatory. So, you don't have to simulate consciousness. You can have real consciousnesses, but if you really want to make great NPCs in the world, then yeah, simulating consciousness would be nice, but you don't really have to go there. You see, you can make a bot program that's going to really simulate a human extremely well. Okay, and it doesn't even have to be an AI. Um, I'm not going to go into the differences between simple bots and true AI, but you don't have to put that much effort into a program for it to behave very similar to a human or just like a human. You can do that. Um, and do we really have to have technology developed to some extreme degree in the future? It's going to be helpful, but I don't think so. Even with our technology right now, and we, if you don't know, are now developing quantum computers. They are already out there, but right now they're just experimental machines. You can write a program on a quantum computer. Apparently, you can access it from through the net. So yeah, the limits of our technology right now, if we stop developing anything, would allow this if we add one crucial element, that is plugging that brain into that computer. That is, in my opinion, well, is it necessary? We could actually not do that. You see, you could have a human with virtual reality goggles, and you could have a world full of really accurately made NPCs, designed not to see the flaws in his movement, for example, because he's gonna have his controllers here, right? And maybe that's not gonna look realistic in the world. So these NPCs would have to say, yeah, he's kind of moving like a robot, but that's okay. Yeah, they won't notice it, and you can do that technically. So the problem here would be that the human wouldn't actually be fully immersed. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. So you would have a simulation like that, and someone would be enjoying themselves in the virtual reality. And if it's going to be a really advanced simulation, those other simulated people around him might not know that they're simulated. They probably wouldn't, of course, and they would possibly have such complex interactions that if you wouldn't really look closely, they could actually pass as human too. Um, so, what about the destruction of civilizations? Let's say, you know, some civilization advances, and boom, it kills itself one way or another. Maybe it makes this bacteria to affect its enemies on the other side of the globe, and it dies from that bacteria too. Maybe it develops atomic weapons, and the other guys develop atomic weapons too, and then they're at the buttons, right? Ready to press, ready to shower their enemies in nukes. And one day, a flock of birds violates their airspace, and unfortunately, someone decides that, yeah, it's time to press the button. So, there are options, a lot of them, including natural options. A supernova, not far away, could wipe out a civilization of the planet. Um, some change to the star generally. So our star is going to eventually become a red giant. We have 5 billion years to that point to think of something like moving our globe away from the star. Um, but you know, um, big comet can kill the dinosaurs, and it could kill us too. So there are ways that a civilization can just stop existing. And let's say that that is the case in almost every possible scenario. So you have a galaxy. Let's say it's the Milky Way. 400 billion stars in it, and let's say that there are millions of civilizations that got to that um, area where you can actually kill yourself, or unfortunately they didn't get to that area because before that some um, asteroid killed them off, or supernova killed them off, or some other cosmic event killed them off. And of all the civilizations, like let's say that through history, a mere 10 million, okay, got to where we are and beyond. And in those 10 million, only 10 survived. What does that mean? At a certain level, you are going to expand to other planets. Now, the first planet you're going to approach or land on will be most likely the planets in your own system. They are the closest ones, and their moons. And then eventually you will go beyond that. Now, it's possible that you're going to expand to several star systems, and some cosmic event is going to wipe you out in all those. It's going to affect all those systems, and your whole civilization is gonna perish. It is possible, yes, but it's just not likely, except supernova. And at that point, you probably can look at nearby stars and decide if the supernova is actually going to happen in anytime soon. Um, so it's probably not going to affect you to the degree of wiping your civilization out. Once you're in a few systems, you're much safer than you were before, and then you expand further away and further and further away, and in the span of a million years, for example, of course, you still can have wars. You still can have events in your own civilization that are gonna do something. But one civilization, one, having a million years and just spreading out with even the limits of our technology, it will take, I think, 1 million. That was the estimate. If you do something like the von Neumann machines from Brown, I think von Neumann, that was the name of it. And what it does is basically it sends some machines to another planet. It's going to take years, not a problem. They're going to get there, land, and then they're going to take the resources that are available and replicate themselves. And then they're going to move to another planet. And what are they're going to do on that planet that they already landed on? They're going to prepare it for their civilization, the civilization that sent them, for example, right? And they're going to just expand like bacteria, for example, or a fungi, or some other thing that just grows in every direction it can. So they're gonna hop from planet to planet, but not one to one, but from one to many planets. And this way you can basically kind of colonize the whole galaxy, no matter how big it is. And you just need one civilization to do that. Of course, it has to want to do this in a way, because uh, maybe it's going to expand to 10 planets and then decide, you know what, we're not increasing our numbers, or we all updated ourselves to computers and now we just don't multiply as we used to, and we're fine with what we have. I don't know. It's kind of hard to predict. We can only just suspect. But as I said, one civilization, one, is enough to take control of the whole galaxy and just run as many simulations, because they have as much computing power of they want as they need, and they will run as many simulations as they want to. Now, what about wanting to run those simulations? One good reason: enjoying yourself, right? So a simulation for the sake of experiencing the world in that time period, or some fantasy world, very different from your one that you're living in. So yeah, that's, in my opinion, that's the easiest thing to do. And it could happen that you could have, imagine one civilization going to a mere 100 planets, making their colonies there, and expanding to maybe a few billion on each planet. Um, and each person has a computer powerful enough to dive into for a long period of time, and then they just experience whatever they want with their memories blocked, right? So they don't remember where they came from. They just experience that world. They live out that imaginary life, but it's true. It's the real life for them, because That's what they think it is. So, um, let's say each planet would have 5 billion people, and each person would have a computer, and maybe 1 in 5 people would actually at any given time be in a simulation. So that's 100 billion people running 100 billion different simulations. Of course, some of them would congregate in one simulation. Some of them would want to know that they are in the game. Some would decide to experience not knowing. Um, you can't accurately predict just how many simulations would be run, but these would not require much computing power. Not really. um, on our machines, we could do something that is very close to what would be needed. And if you add to our computing power that we have, in our homes right now, then in the future you can have really many, many simulations. Of course, those will be those simple simulations. One person or maybe 10 people in a world where everybody else is just uh, computer generated, really. Okay, so let me tell you a story now. I'm not saying it happened or anything like that. It's an interesting story, and it's gonna just highlight some possibility, and then I'm gonna just build up. This is to show you just how probable it is to be in a simulation or not, exactly, and what the possibilities there are. So, we have a few friends: Michael, Jane, Andrew, Charlie, Bill, and Mary. And they're living in a world like ours. And we, from our perspective, know that they are actually 7 levels deep. Now, what does that mean? You see, level one is the world that developed a computer making this incredible simulation. And in that simulation, people actually developed technology and made a computer that made this incredible simulation. And in that simulation, they made another simulation. And this basic world, that's level zero. Okay. And each one uh, simulation in a simulation is one higher in numbers, right? So we got 7 levels here. Now, they don't know that they're in a simulation, but they like to think about stuff, and they get together, and it turns out that there are some things that kind of point to that, and they start to think more and more about this, and eventually they decide, you know what, we are in a simulation and we need to get out. That's what they want to experience. And eventually they find a way, and they move to level 6. But then it turns out that Michael is unfortunately an AI. Now, this kind of confuses them all because they like Michael and he's their friend, right? And what do they do now? Well, they think about it and they decide that they're going to take Michael along with them. You see, he's basically a digital human being. So they upload him to robot body, not a problem, level 6. And, um, well, for a brief time, they live in that world, that they actually dived into level 7 previously. But after some time, they start thinking about it, and they know these signs, and they figure out that yes, they are actually in a simulation. Again, this is a simulated world. So they find a way out. But now they're kind of reluctant, you see. One of their group turned out to be an AI. Now he kind of came to terms with that, but what if someone else is an AI? They don't really want to be an AI. They want to be a real human being, and that's not something they really want to find out. But eventually, they convince one another that they need to move to a higher level. And what do you know? They are all, except Michael, yeah, real. In level 5, they are all real people. Oh, and they discover a few things. You see, in level 6, there are actually 10 supercomputers, and people are diving from level 6 to level 7 all the time. And when they move to level 5, it turns out that, well, the whole level 6 is on one supercomputer, but there are 100 supercomputers like that on level 5, and each of them has about 10 level 6s generated on them. Ah, okay. So they were just in one possibility of 100 right there. And from that, they were in one of the 10 possibilities. Okay, let's leave that. But let's note one thing. Michael, an AI from level 7, now moved to level 5. Uh, and for him, this experience is very bizarre in a way, but he's kind of getting used to it because, well, as I said, he came to terms. He's an AI. He's maybe not biologically developed, but now he's going where no uh, person of his level actually got. So now, as they traversed two worlds to the beginning in that direction, they quickly find out that they are in a simulation again. They know what to look for, and they decide, okay, we're in a simulation, and we went this far. We have to see where this actually leads us, why we're here. Um, so they move to level 4, and then unfortunately, it turns out that Jane is also an AI. It was a real person in level 5, but in level 4, it turns out she was generated, computer generated there. Now, this kind of puzzles them again. It's not like they didn't expect this, but yeah, now they have two people in their group generated by the computer. She takes it fairly well. They all expected that some of them might actually become, turn out to be an AI when they move a level up. So they accept that pretty quickly. And what do you know? They find out again that they're in a simulation. Oh, and by the way, level 4 has 1,000 computers, supercomputers, that is. They're big, they're massive, and each of them is in a different star system. And each of those computers has, well, it generates one level 5 and etc. Right? So, yeah, there's a lot of possibilities. There's a lot of very similar worlds. Um, but yet they are all kind of different because um, they were developed in a slightly different way, right? It's not like one level 6 was copied to some other um, computer that generated a level 6. No, it was developed on its own. Okay, the basis might have been the same, but the more you move towards uh, the basic world, the more variations you see down the line. Okay, so Then they moved to level 3, as you probably thought about it. And again, everybody seems to be what they were before. So they got two AIs, one from level 7, one from level 5. And the rest of them, the four left, they seem to be real. But yes, eventually they move to level 2. And unfortunately, Andrew and Charlie are AIs. So now suddenly there are four AIs and only two people. But are they people? Well, eventually they decide that they need to check that out. And yeah, they move to level 1. And yes, they are people. But then, no. Uh, Actually, Bill is left as the only person because Mary turns out to be, and this is the woman he loved, for example, and unfortunately, it turns out she was actually an AI all along. So now he, as the only real human, kind of, um, doesn't know what to think about all this, but he generally finds out, yes, this is a simulation again, and he moves to level 0. And now he is also an AI. But then things come back to him when he finally emerges, and it turns out he's actually been on such runs before, or such dives. You see, in his society, everyone uploaded themselves. So they are all AIs now. They were all based on humans, but when they kind of uploaded themselves, they stopped reproducing. Now, they thought about creating new AIs, but they would be digital from birth, and that kind of was a problem. So they thought about a different way. Why not make a simulation, or many simulations actually? And in those simulations would be other simulations, and members of their society would go in and fish out some AIs, or more accurately, digital humans, somewhere from the depth of it. See, when you're actually digital, it's not a problem to get uploaded to a better machine, basically. Uh, you get an even better machine that controls 10 worlds like yours, or 10 universes. And then you move up, and it turns out that there's a better machine that controls 100 of those that each controls 10. As you see, it's not a problem. And so our happy group uh, starts a new life in this uh, level 0 world. Happy ending of sorts. Now, as you probably noticed, I at some point stopped calculating the worlds, but let's just go through those levels. At some point, it turns out the technology is not perhaps going through to other planets in the higher levels, but it's just getting smaller, and then each level can have its own specifications. So the technology is going to be better, but better might mean that the computing power is bigger because the machines grew bigger, or you can feed it more energy, or maybe they're just more efficient because their code was developed for a million years, and the machines were too. So what's the high point of the peak in this story? Well, let's say it's 10,000 planets and 10,000 computers feeding off stars. And that's pretty much all they needed. But actually, a lot of these simulations are run on computers that individuals possess. So you have a very advanced computer that simply is advanced because everyone has an advanced computer, and it can run a simulation that has its own set of simulations run, and each of those simulations has a set of simulations. So in reality, the amount of simulated worlds, like, they branch off like branches in a tree, and each leaf is something of an end simulation in a simulation, a simulation, a simulation. And of course, here I mentioned 7 levels, but there might be 10, there might be 20. But one thing you have to understand, all of those simulated worlds will have to be simulated by the machine in level 0. So it has to manage to do that. And that might be a limiting factor because if you have one simulation and the people in that simulation develop 10 different massive simulations, then they can have 10 computers, but then there's only one computer that needs to calculate all that. Now, one possible thing to make that happen is to just simulate worlds that have technology that's far below your technology. So if we add 1,000,000 years to what we have now, um, I don't think you would doubt with our technological development that someone uh, having their cell phone and having a whim, to generate a super advanced simulation and watching it play out, um, that could happen. It could happen billions of times every day, So, and then those simulations in there, or the people in that simulation would create another and branching off. Yes. So, do we have some examples in our world of such behavior, of such worlds and worlds, or games and games? Well, games and games, yes. Um, Sometimes you get this AAA advanced game, and it has a smaller game inside. Um, for example, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. That was the third installment in the series. Um, you got a character roam the world that you can, of course, that piece of the world. Free cities. It had it's kind of like having Los Angeles and two others. They were, of course, differently named, um, and of course, they're not totally shown in the game; just parts of them, pretty much. Um, and you had actually a number of little games that you could play. You could go and play some, for example, old time pinball machine, right? But that's not digital in the game, right? It's a game in the game, yes, but it's not kind of a digital game. So you could go and play Space Invaders, or something like the arcade game, and there were a number of these, I think. And other games do the same thing. StarCraft 2, for example, has this small game where you have a little spaceship and you shoot hordes of enemies, and others still. That's, of course, a very simple thing compared to what you would need later on to make these simulations realistic and to make them happen, really. But the the thing itself is already made. Okay, so you got games and games, and if we go back to Minecraft, which I already mentioned, some guy on the net actually made um, a simple computer in it, because the mechanics of the game kind of allow that. So it was like a 8-bit computer, maybe a calculator actually. So you put in two numbers and then you pull a lever, and over the span of 2 minutes, I think it calculated your result, which is brilliant. um, but that's just the beginning. But the beginning is here. Okay, so for the last part of the video, I'd like to point out a few things that could be an indication that we're in simulated reality. Just understand that nothing actually says that we for sure are in such a reality. But if you're looking for some arguments that might point to that, here they are. Okay, so first, the double slit experiment. Now, if you didn't hear about this, it's a very interesting thing. Basically, you got this board and two slits, and you send photons toward it, and behind that, you got a wall, and then something photosensitive, that registers where the photons hit. So first, you pour in a stream of light, and you would think, okay, then I'm gonna get these two um, shapes that the light, is coming through the slits. But that's not what happens. It's like the photons are kind of bouncing around or from each other. They somehow react with each other. That's kind of how at first they saw this, because what you get there is this pattern of these slits, like 10 of them or more. And so they try to see what's going on. So they start sending one photon at a time, okay? So they can't react with each other. And the result was the same. So they say, okay, that's very interesting. Let's measure how this is actually done. Let's take a closer look. So they put machine, a measuring device, closer, and guess what? The experiment changed. The result changed. You had suddenly two slits again. Uh, not 10, just two presented there. They removed the machine. You got a number. They put it closer in, and yes, they're observing where that photon goes, because it can, of course, hit anywhere on the board. It just randomly sometimes goes through one of these slits. And you get two slits on the photosensitive material. Now, of course, a conclusion here could be that maybe the machine measuring this was the thing that interfered somehow with the photons. But they actually refined the experiment, and it turned out that if you know where the photon is going to go, uh, I'm not going to go into the details here, but there's a number of these mirrors and such, and if you know where it's going to go, the difference is just like here, basically. So what this means is your knowledge of the exact way the photon went affects the outcome, and it affects it every time, and it affects it drastically. So what does that mean? Well, if you have a generated world, right? So in a computer, that's kind of what you could expect. Some simplified version, randomized perhaps. That happens on average always, but then when the system detects that there is a detector close by, it behaves like it should. Of course, we could say, well, why wouldn't it always behave like that, and not cause a fuss? Or perhaps that's a programming error. Someone making the simulation, yeah, didn't count for this, and now everybody knows, and uh, they wouldn't want to reset everything. Or maybe that was something that was supposed to be weird and different. Or maybe this is something that the people simulating us, if we're in a simulation, of course, would put in, knowing and even pointed us in the direction. Because you see, they are thinking about the same thing that's present in their world. And they're thinking, maybe we're simulated. So they made a simulation, or maybe 100 simulations, with a replica of their world with more primitive technology, and they kind of want to see if someone here, which is basically a group of people, just like in their world, is gonna invent some answer, or find out what this is all about. And in that sense, they have 100 worlds working on the problem, and they will benefit from the results, whatever they are, right? Of course, if they are also simulated, then well, someone level up might actually benefit from the results even more, or maybe there was some other reason for this difference between the observed experiment and unobserved, that we can't really think of now. The next thing, the Fermi paradox. So, what is the Fermi paradox? The Fermi paradox is the fact that we theoretically didn't encounter any alien advanced life forms, and our calculations show that we should. Now, some of you might disagree with this. There are definitely recordings of many different things that seem to be flying in a way that don't. Well, our technology doesn't seem to be able to produce those effects, or not in a specific way that we could observe in some situations. But I'm not going to go into that. If you assume that, okay, all of those recordings, all those sightings, or whatever, that they were false, then what we have is the wow signal. This is the very short blip on a recording that it's pretty much, it's almost sure that it's artificial. Okay, but it just happened once and not again. So no one knows what to do or think about it. There's a very weird star observed lately that seems to actually lose some of its brightness. And this isn't about planets moving in front of it. Okay, this is a different effect. It's like it's going darker and then brightening up. If you have, say, a Dyson sphere around the planet, so that's kind of energy collector, basically. So you build these rings around the planet and build them up. You know, we could, with our technology, technically do that. Um, and it swirls around that star, then this would possibly cause such an effect, depending on what its shape would exactly be. Um, there are, I think, a few different things. We had an object recorded moving through the system that was like needle shaped, and it just moved through our system and like a comet. Those are only the things that aren't doubtful. They are out there. There's no doubt that they are accepted by all scientists. Okay, so those might point to some form of um, advanced alien intelligence out there, but the truth is they're not conclusive, and they're just like suggestions more than anything. So if we just assume that every recording out there is of nothing, weather balloons, I don't know, you name it, right? Then we have a very weird absence of other advanced civilizations out there. Nothing from there. No radio waves, no communication, no things that we could observe around our stars, And if we're in a simulation, that could be easily explained. The simulation doesn't uh, revolve around what's out there. What's out there is shown to be a lot of nothing, and the reality might be that the galaxy would be filled with these civilizations. Everywhere you would go, there would be some civilization popping up, but in this simulation, you have nothing, pretty much. Another thing, deja vu. You know the effect that you see something and you have this feeling that you've done this before. Well, normally, doctors, medics, generally physicians, they try to explain this by something in your brain, kind of. There's a delay between what you actually observe and then you process that, and we all have that. So, but it's like a fraction of a second, really. So, not going too deep into that. If it's a simulation, and if you take that effect and look at it closely, then what you could deduct is that it's actually the code being rewritten. Or, for example, you opened a door or went somewhere where the program didn't figure out that you were going there, right? And then you got this kind of glitch, or maybe there had to be a rollback in time, actually a small one, for some reason. Then some people remember it. I was like, wait, didn't I experience this? Or maybe you're in a game, right? And you're experiencing everything, but there are set events that trigger at random times, and there's a glitch. You see, and some events are just because they're properly procedurally generated, and some trigger 2 times in different periods of time. So yeah, that could be an indication, or maybe it doesn't have to be, of course, just a possibility. Um, okay, next thing, people that remember everything. Now, not too long ago, I saw a YouTube video on the subject of our brains, and I actually saw quite a few of those. But this one mentioned that we remember everything. Actually, it's stored somewhere in our brain, or almost everything. But we don't. We're not able to recall everything because it wasn't important. Now, I thought, it's not really stored there, or some bits are, but this statement actually contradicts that. But there's one type of people that have this extraordinary ability. They can recollect days they lived past. Let's say, what was 10 years ago? What did you eat for lunch? Okay. You don't remember, but they would. And I heard about a guy who, for example, read 6,000 books and remembered every one of them and could quote, like just from his mind, could recite the whole book for you. And then another. Um, Now, if we're in a simulation, then this could be explained by some of the simulated people having, instead of limiting the amount of storage space they can access or have generally, um, it would be unlimited anyway, right? So that would be a drain on the computing power, but in a huge mega computer, it wouldn't really matter. Um, so that could be an explanation for that. Of course, I'm not saying again that it is okay. It just might be if in the case of being in a simulation. Okay, dark energy and dark matter. Now, you probably heard about this. Um, the way our universe behaves, uh, it's like it has too much energy and too much matter. Like we're not seeing most of the energy and a lot of, or maybe most of the matter out there. So the term dark energy and dark matter were coined, those terms, because, well, they're like unseen. They could be called invisible or something like that. Just what they thought about, and that's what they named them. Now, because of these two, so some unseen force, basically, our galaxies are moving away from each other. Now, maybe that's a bad thing, maybe that's a good thing. It may be a good thing because that means that for the foreseeable future, at least, we're not gonna uh, st- start to come back to the center, drawn by gravity, and get all crushed in it, right? So, but then, of course, probably another Big Bang would happen, and the universe would kind of expand and contract again and again. But as it seems now, we're going to be floating away from each other, and eventually you're going to look at, well, some future human, if we make it that far, is going to look at the night sky, and it's going to be very dark. There are going to be very few stars, and then fewer and fewer, not because they will physically stop existing, but all the galaxies are going to just move away. And eventually, the future would be a very cold lack of energy, basically, unless we figure something out, like going to a different dimension, for example, or parallel world. Actually, that would be more accurate. But yeah, if we're in a simulation, then that's just how it's simulated. Of course, such an answer, you can apply that to everything. It's kind of like taking God and just saying, yeah, you don't understand that, but that's because God wants that. You can also say the same thing about being in a simulation in a way, about this. But this is something that is there. We see the effect, but we don't see the cause, and that's puzzling. Okay, so that simulation theory could be an explanation of that in a way. Um, and finally, the very structure of atoms. Now, we are all composed of mainly empty space. If a proton is this big, let's say an inch across, right, and electron is like a grain of sand, and you take football field and you put the proton inside, like in the middle, and you spin that electron around that field, and it goes like this, over. Then from a perspective, it goes so fast, you see almost like a ball, like a huge ball around that football field. Of course, that would be a hydrogen atom, and you got neutrons, of course, in atoms too. But what that amounts to is you get an increasingly large ball of protons and neutrons inside, and you get more and more of these electrons spinning around them. But mostly everything around you is empty space. And if you actually look deeper inside the protons and the neutrons, you will find quarks. And well, I heard a statement that if you could kind of zoom in at the quarks and look deeper inside, then you would find more empty space and some other particle inside them. As till now, we cannot confirm or deny that. That's just pure speculation. But the thing is, when we zoomed in on the little bits of matter, it was more empty space with something in the distance. So everything around you, it's pretty much empty space. Every piece of matter, your computer, the screen you're watching now, all that. And does that kind of point out us towards a simulation? Well, that would be an efficient way to kind of show everything, but would that be the only way? I think that kind of, you see, we're used to the idea that everything is empty. When you kind of go to school and learn about atoms at all, you're gonna find that, oh, okay, that's how it is. Okay, that's right. Yeah. But in the early days, when this was kind of developed, I imagine people might have had a lot of bad dreams about this. Definitely about bacteria. That's also something small, right? You don't see, and some people, when it was eventually established, and every scientist left alive would say, "Yeah, okay, yeah, we got bacteria everywhere." Some people would go crazy about that kind of, but not going too much into that. That pretty much sums it up. I could go and kind of take other stuff and say, you know what, if we're in a simulation, that makes sense and that makes sense. But what does that matter for us? Well, I think the biggest issue is if you're a religious person or not. Because if you're a religious person, it might be a very bad thing for you or might be a very good thing for you. Now, why would it be a very bad thing? If you're a simulated entity, then, well, I don't know if having a soul, for example, applies there or not to a computer program. But as I said, like maybe 10 times in this video alone, if you just upload yourself, your consciousness into a computer, then are you a human or not? Those are deep questions. But if you're in a simulation, then, well, everything around you is what the programmer made it, not God, right? So by default, you kind of don't have God, or do you? Because the programmer could put God in and actually could put anything in. Magic, you name it, right? Anything that you can imagine could theoretically be put in such a world. So the possibilities would be limitless. And eventually, if you just move up the levels to level zero, maybe there is a very active God. Maybe there you have a very different situation than here. Like, you pray, you pray, you pray, nothing happens. Or something happens and you don't know if that was the prayer or not. But there may be, who knows, a few words and some entity who is a god, or maybe is just um, a very advanced being, that's omnipotent in a way, because it just got to that level of technology that it can do anything. And you just talk to it and it kind of does stuff if it wants to. Who knows, right? Who knows? But most likely, um, what this points at is a big, huge nothing. Really, you shouldn't really take this to heart and try to, I don't know, change your life, or go on a mad quest of discovering if you could actually prove this is a simulation or get out of simulation, and don't kill yourself or something like that. That's stupid, okay? Because if you're actually simulated, then you're deleting yourself and maybe nothing will be left. But let's say you had a family tragedy and you are actually are simulated. That is, here in this world, you were generated by a computer. Well, if we're in some sort of simulation game, then that may mean that there are millions of copies of this kind of game. Uh, in other worlds, you just don't have that tragedy happening to you, family loss or whatever it is. Okay, and that's kind of like mm, the theory that everything that could happen happens. Well, this wouldn't be exactly like this. This would be limited to the amount of copies run uh, anywhere, but a popular simulation might actually have the base value, the starting point, um, reproduced millions of times, billions, trillions of times. Um, So all that is kind of mind-boggling, but really, don't do anything drastic. That's my suggestion to you. Just live your life, as you want, and don't worry about it. Basically, um, if ever it points to something, then you will probably find out one way or another. And is it positive or not? We'll decide if anything is ever proven, right? But it's kind of a interesting concept to think about. And even if we're in the real world, then the truth is, one day, not in such a distant future, we're going to have to address this issue, because we're going to be making better and better simulations. We are, for a while now, um, making better and better games, and some of them you can spend years in. And when the technology goes far enough, you're going to just plug yourself into a machine and spend quite a bit of your time, or a big portion of your life, in that simulation, if you of course want that. And that's it, that's it. So as usual, you know you know what to do, what to click if you liked it. Sorry if it's too long, but you know what, limiting to these to say 10 minutes, as most YouTubers do, I just wouldn't have the time to talk about all this. And of course, if you want more on the subject, leave a comment. And if there's just enough of those comments, or enough likes by those comments, I might be making another movie specifying or talking about whatever you want, okay, on this subject or another. So bye. Thanks for watching. I hope I didn't bore you.